Welcome to Stories with Traction, unedited and unfiltered. These are real conversations with leaders who have walked through trials and triumph. In a world of AI-polished sound bites and scripted perfection, this podcast isn't about being flawless. It's about being purposeful. I'm your host, Matt Zahn. We're going to find out what drives these leaders, what's their story, and how can we learn from their experiences. Get inspired and enjoy Stories with Traction. Jody, welcome to Stories with Traction podcast.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Thanks for having me on. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, I really appreciate your time. First question I have for you, Jody, is when you're at a networking event or a party and someone asks you, what do you do? What's your response to that question?
Yeah, first of all, I hate networking events.
So we can unpack that a little bit if you want.
Yeah, super uncomfortable. But, at the networking event, you've got to do it. People come and talk to you all the time about it. What I tell clients is I help business owners, I help entrepreneurs get from where they are today to where they want to be. And through that, I do that through a financial lens. And so that kind of either dead ends right there if they're truly curious about things, or if they're super curious about they'll continue asking. And then I can kind of go into a little bit more and talking about how we, the kind of the services we provide, they give them that broad thing, but basically just kind of helping entrepreneurs, get from point A to point B. Everybody's story is a little different, and everybody wants to go different directions, so we help them do that.
Sure. So you mentioned financial lens, and I'm sure that that's, pretty large umbrella. There's multiple aspects on what that means.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of times individuals go into business and they have an idea of what they need to be doing financially, but it's not till much later that they realize that they were doing it wrong all along. Are there certain just different aspects of perception from business leaders that you would say typically when an entrepreneur is getting started, like this is what they should really be focused on, but they can save themselves from a lot of pain and suffering if they were to do it much sooner than learning the hard way?
Yeah, it happens all the time. We're all accidental entrepreneurs for most of us. I was accidental entrepreneur, was an employee, didn't like it. I thought, hey, I got to figure something out. Let's do something by myself. So we all do it, but and a lot of us really don't have that expertise on the financial acumen at all. You might be a great plumber, might be a great, heating and air person, whatever, but we really don't have that financial stuff. Even as an accountant, I came into the world, it was like I didn't have the financial expertise to start my own business. You think about that, it's kind of funny, accountant not having the financial expertise, but I never done it before. I've never done it for myself. And it's a lot different when you're in your own shoes versus trying to guide somebody else in their shoes. And so, with that, the biggest mistake I think I made, right from the beginning is really not having or building enough cash. I always thought I could outsell my next issue, my next problem. And I could, it was great. I had the knack for selling. I could sell, not a big deal. But with that, I didn't really develop the cash to really build the barriers, the safety nets, the things that, really every business owner needs in order to make those solid decisions. And so, as we learn, I developed this profit focused accounting process system. The biggest thing I focused on was cash. How much cash do you truly need? And for a service-based business, it's about 10% of your revenue. When you think about it, it's really easy to calculate, right? You're $1 million company, $100,000 in the bank. And a lot of people are like, wow, that's a lot of money, but that really you need that. That's just the regular money that, the flow of money, how much it takes to actually go through that without having to worry about if someone pays late or not. And so, cash is the biggest thing. And, you mentioned that, and it just really strikes a lot of things, because when people come to me and ask me, hey, what should I do, Jody? I've got this great opportunity. I got this salesperson that's great. Should I hire that person or not? The first question I ask, well, how much cash do you have in the bank? If you don't have a lot of cash, I'm going to say probably have to pass on that opportunity. If you got a lot of cash, let's do it. The risk factor is there. So cash just alleviates that risk. And that goes with every question that a CFO is going to guide a business with is, how much cash do you have? What kind of risk are we taking by doing whatever that might be? And so cash, number one.
So when you say 10% of revenue, are you saying if a business they're generating $1 million of revenue a year, they should be saving 10% of that every year?
Not 10% every year. They should have 10% in the bank. And
10% in
so,
the bank. Okay.
yeah, so $100,000 should be in some sort of liquid account. We usually tell people to get, because it's super easy to mentally math that, right? There's a formula that goes through it to prove that. But it's just easy to mental math. Hey, 10%, pretty simple. If I'm a service-based company, if I've got inventory, stuff like that, probably 12.5 to 15%. So it's a little different math, but same concept. And so what that means is you continually building that cash. And so we say two paychecks should stay in what we call an operating account. That's where everything's flowing through. The rest of it should go in some sort of short-term investment account, like not CDs, but high interest checking accounts, that sort of thing, where you're getting like 4% of your money or 3% of your money, something like that. So it's not sitting idle. You don't want idle cash sitting around, but you want that there so that you're using your cash as your line of credit. Where most people will get rid of their cash, take it out of the business, then they have to have this line of credit. They're using the bank's money, which is not always a great idea. We recommend using your own money, and that's built right into that 10%.
All right, so this is a pretty loaded question,
Sure.
and you could take it whatever direction you want. But what
Yep.
is your opinion on leveraging debt? Is there a very wise way? Obviously, there's a more wise way to do it than not. But because you're talking
Right.
about building enough cash and use cash as a line of credit, when would be appropriate for someone who just started a business, now they're transitioning maybe into that startup type phase to actually leverage debt to grow and to scale?
Yeah, so that's a dangerous question, real dangerous question. Because when you get into like the big companies that where they're, you got your stock and you got your shareholders and you've got a bunch of, things, leveraging debt's super important. You've got to leverage debt. When you get into the smaller companies, what happens is, it becomes a reason to borrow money, and it becomes an easier reason I can take more money out of the company than what I should be taking out of the company. Because lifestyle is going to creep in there. So if you're super strong with that, where you've got, you're making your profit margin, you're making your salaries, you're making everything that you're doing, probably don't need debt at all. You need a line of credit. You always need a line of credit. No matter what, line of credit should always be there for you in case of an emergency. But outside of that, when you're buying something that you cannot pull out of your cash reserve, your cash reserve is there. Maybe you need to then keep that cash reserve, but you've got a capital improvement to make or something big. That's not a problem. So you do long-term debt, never short-term debt, long-term debt for that capital improvement. If it's a 5 or 6 year type of asset or property, then it's fine. But I do caution people because I hear a lot of people say, "Hey, leverage debt. Use debt to your benefit." The problem is a lot of folks don't. They use it to basically basically work their lifestyle, support their lifestyle, and that's a bad choice if you're using debt for that at all. Not a good choice there. So it really depends on the entrepreneur. It depends on that. For me, not a great idea because if I had the money in there, I was pulling it out, and using it for something else. My business partner, it was great for him. He could keep it in there forever and he wouldn't touch it. And I'm just saying that because you might have two different personalities within the same company, and so you have to make sure you understand that too. And so that's a dangerous thing. If you're a small company, I would say under $1 million and you don't need to borrow money, don't. If you absolutely have to borrow money to leverage, then make sure that you're doing it in a very responsible, stewardish type way.
Great point. I appreciate you sharing that. So we're talking about smaller companies.
Mhm.
So let's say, smaller companies doing everything that you're recommending that they do. So they
Right.
start to grow and they're bringing on more people and more clients and there's more value out there. So they keep growing and growing.
Yep.
I'm hearing a lot, especially from like medium-sized companies that they're
Mhm.
leveraging AI for so many different things. And it's
Mhm.
starting to creep into the financial aspect as well, where they're
Mhm.
relying on different algorithms to predict different trends and give them recommendations. I want you to shoot us straight as it pertains to AI
Mhm.
and maybe some of potential detriment or headaches that companies are unaware of that AI can bring into the mix when we're talking about and from a financial lens.
Sure. First of all, I love AI. Use it all the time. I probably use it 15, 20 times a day. I use it for my personal use. I use it for business. We use it within our business. And so we use AI a ton. So I'm a huge proponent of AI. The only issue that we've got right now with AI is that it doesn't always give you the truth. It gives you, and it's getting better and better and better as we go. So you've got to be able to look at that and do the reasonable test with everything you do. So don't rely on AI to make all your decisions without having somebody look over it first. If it's a major decision, minor decision's not a big deal. Especially if you got cash in the bank, not a big deal. You can take that little risk. But the major decisions, you really want somebody looking over it, and which is really important. And a perfect example would be is that every day I'm going through and putting in my personal portfolio. Hey, here's my personal portfolio compared to my personal portfolio, what it was yesterday, what it was the day before, how has it improved over the past year. And often it forgets one little thing. My CDs, and I call, if I've got CDs invested, I count that as cash. And for some reason, every once in a while, it's like, oh, you've got, X amount of dollars in cash. And it's like, but it's not including the CDs. And it's like, hey, remember, include the CDs in as cash. So boom, it puts it in cash. Hey, I'll remember that going forward. 2 or 3 weeks later, my CDs are no longer in cash, and it acts like I had never heard of that before. And so then I do it again. And so with that, the learning process, that's just a minor part. But think about that if it was a major, major thing, and you're looking at and you're trying to make a decision on something, and you really are making a bad decision because the facts aren't in there correctly. And so highly recommend that you just continually oversee it, continually look at it, continually question it. Don't take anything for granted. Don't take anything as if it's 100% true. Use AI against AI, put it into a different AI model, use it to compare each other. And once you're doing that, I really think AI can be one of your best friends, especially as a CEO in a company. It could be your best friend. It's more than just an email person. It's more than just an assistant. It could be that advisor that you're sitting aside just bouncing questions off and asking. But it's always important to have somebody overseeing what you're doing and making sure it's accurate. Now, will that be the case in 5, 10 years from now? Probably not. It'll probably work itself to where, hey, that's a solid thing, and you can start relying on it even more. But until it's there, always have a safeguard, always have that person looking over it.
Yeah, I really like you said use AI against AI. I don't think
Hmm.
enough people and businesses do that. They get into the routine of using one system and they just stay there. And that is interesting because often when we're making a big decision, we're not just going to ask one person. We're going to get
Right.
multiple opinions, right? But are we
Mhm.
actually doing that with AI? I think that's
Mhm.
something simplistic but very powerful that people can implement.
And,
So I
and I do
appreciate
that
you
with all of
mentioning.
them, right? It's really simple. You just simply take your chat, you put in another one. Hey, I just got this from Grok. Hey, can you poke holes in this for me? What's right and what's wrong about it? Give me some other alternatives. And it's amazing the information it spits out. It's like, huh, that's kind of cool. And then it's cool. Sometimes it's like, hey, I agree with it. It's awesome. Let's do it. And like, okay, well, that's positive too. But it doesn't hurt. I mean, you're right. When you get advice, you don't just ask one person typically. It's a committee of people, and you might as well use a committee of AI, while you're doing it.
Sure. Yeah, really good
Mhm.
point. So I wanna go back in time. I really like understanding how someone got to where they are in life. I think there's a lot that we could all learn from it. So if I had a remote control and I could hit the rewind button and I could go back to you at 13 and I could ask
Oh, geez.
13-year-old
Sure.
Jody what he
Hmm.
wanted to do, what he wanted to be, what kind of response would I have gotten in return?
Yeah, that's a great question. 13-year-old Jody, man, going way back then. Yeah, that might not be a great thing. I probably wanted to be a garbage man collector at that point would be the biggest thing at an earlier age. The trucks were pretty cool. But, as I got, as I grew up a little bit more, I thought, hey, my dad was an entrepreneur. I hated it because it was like I was always working for free for him. It was like it seems like I'm always working for my dad. I'm always working for free. And so I thought, hey, I don't want to ever be an entrepreneur ever. That's not going to work. And so I thought, hey, let's do a little bit in the accounting world. I thought, hey, what about the accounting? I really like that. As I took classes in high school, I thought, hey, that's kind of cool. But then I thought, in economics, maybe that's great. Maybe I can be a finance person. I thought that'd be kind of neat too. And then when I went to college, it was kind of weird because I wasn't sure exactly what I wanted to do. I knew it was something business related, but I didn't know exactly. And I thought, hey, let's do economics. I thought that's got to be it. And then I started realizing pretty quickly that I'm from Indiana, from northeast corner, Fort Wayne. I thought, hey, if I'm going to really do something with economics, that means I got to move to New York City. And I thought, because the stock market and stuff like that. And I thought, I really don't want to do that. So what can I do that if this doesn't work, then maybe I can do it do, maybe I can go on my own like my dad was doing. Even though I didn't like it, I got to have that backup plan. So I thought, hey, accounting seems like the perfect opportunity for that. So I did accounting, I went through college. It took me about 7 years to go through. I had to pay my way through college, worked all these kind of odds and end types of jobs. And then I got out of it. I was super excited. I got an opportunity to work for a really large accounting firm. I thought, this is it. I have made it. And then I got into it and it's like, I hate accounting. It was like, I hate it. It was like, oh my gosh, this is horrible. I did auditing first, and I was like, oh, that's not me. It's got to be tax. And so I did tax, and it's like, oh, this is just brutal. Don't like this either. And I thought, well, what am I going to do here? So I thought, hey, maybe there's an opportunity to in the corporate world. And ironically, I got fired from my job in accounting, and they said I'd never be successful in accounting. That's what the managing partner told me. I'm like, you're right. I'm going to find something different. So I went into the corporate world and I thought, hey, let's try this corporate world and see how this works. And man, it was a blast. I took an 80-hour work week, that the person had before me, and I got it down to about 30 to 40 hours. And I was like, this is great. I'm automating everything. I'm really enjoying it. And then about 3 years later, it's like, oh, this is so boring. It's like, what did I get myself into again? And so then I was an orphaned accountant. I was like, here, I got this great job. I don't like what I'm doing. I can't do this forever. And this what am I going to do? And that's when I thought, hey, let me see if I can do my own thing and start my own business. And that's when I started and creating the accounting firm. And with that, I thought, hey, I'm going to do it differently than all other accounting firms do it. I'm not going to bill by the hour. I'm not going to wear a suit and tie. I'm not going to do, I'm not going to be the corporate type of accountant. I'm going to be something completely different. And that's how I got started. I read a lot of books. I read tons and tons and tons of books. E-Myth was one that really stood out to me. It was one that I really thought, hey, if I can develop processes, then instead of me being my dad, which was he was a sole entrepreneur. He really didn't have any employees, maybe one or two. I thought I don't want to be the small person. I want to be something bigger than that. And so when I created it, I thought, hey, how can I really create something that I enjoy doing that I can teach other people, but also be really good stewards to them. I didn't want to work them bazillion hours like the other accounting firms did. If you ever, accounting firm, nightmares, a lot of accounting firms, you'll work 60, 70, 80 hours a week during their busy time of the year from January through April. And that's a brutal time to go through. And I didn't want to do that. I was like, I can't have my people doing that. I can't have me doing that. And so that's kind of really how things just got started. I went from, potentially being a garbage man all the way to, possibly being, working on the stock market, realized that I didn't want to move, thought the accounting world was it, realized, heck, accounting is not for me. And then eventually the entrepreneur.
Yeah, so there's a lot to unpack with what you said. So I'm trying to envision you, you had said potentially being doing garbage and then going to stock market and everything. So when you were
Mhm.
working with your father,
Mhm.
do you feel that you were maybe not directly, but maybe subconsciously you were learning grit through that experience?
100%, 100%. Yeah, because my father, he was a police officer and he did that for a long time. He had 20 some years on the police department. And then he got out of that and decided, hey, I want to create this audio visual company. And so it was AV. And the big thing was like commercials and help and, all these different things. And I thought this is kind of cool. But with it, and then when he brought me aboard to, hey, help him out, it was just one of those things, he was never really making a ton of money. He's just kind of walking through and going through the process. And it was just like a continuous cycle. He would get a little ahead, then he'd get back behind. He'd make a lot of money, land this great job, and then it would be, a long time before you get the next one. And, with that, I think you're right. I think that's where grit became, part of it, just seeing him and his struggles and his continuing going through it and going through it. And he's still doing it today. So it's not a failed adventure by any means. 20 years it's morphed into, different things, but it's really the same type of thing. And I not only see the grit there, but I think it really helped me realize, hey, small business owners. I mean, my dad's a perfect example. He didn't have a finance background, and he's just doing just enough to basically where he's got a job. He calls himself an entrepreneur. Really, he's got a job, and the job is himself. And I thought, hey, what do I want to if I'm going to do this? I got to do it differently than that. I can't, I don't want the job. I could have easily back then just say, hey, I want to take in and just do tax returns and do tax returns for a bunch of people, make a bunch of money doing it, then walk away really with nothing. And I wanted something I could grow bigger than that. So yeah, grit and really kind of give me great direction on what I didn't want, what I liked about it, but what I didn't want. Because I also saw that he was able to do vacations and do things that the normal person working a 9 to 5 job couldn't do. And I thought, well, that's kind of cool too. So there's the benefits there too. You could definitely see it as a kid when you're growing up. And, with that, I thought, hey, I'd like to have that, all these benefits without having to, work because he worked a lot. He worked, 80, 90 hours a week, that he still does that. He works a ton of hours. And, with that, I knew I didn't want to do that. So it kind of gave me direction, hey, here's what I want. Here's my goal at the end, but here's what I don't want. And, with that, it really, I think you're right. It really helped me become who I am today for sure.
Yeah, so you mentioned the grit piece, what that did for you, but also while you were sharing about your background, you mentioned the word boring a few
Hmm.
times, right? You did
Yep.
this and then you found it boring, and then you did this and found it boring.
Hmm.
And often in business, we have to go through boring things for breakthroughs. So share with us like the balancing act between going through the boring and the mundane and the grit to make it work, but also bringing in that layer of creativity because clearly you've done both. You'd mentioned, I'm
Right.
not going to be the suit and tie guy. I'm not going to do this.
Yep.
I'm not going to do that. There's an element of creativity to that. So where's that balancing act?
Yeah, it's kind of funny because when I started Summit and now we're Anders, so I grew it up and then sold it, which is great. Now I'm I'm basically running a service line within a larger CPA firm right now. So it's kind of I've had that full venture, and with that when I started Summit, it was one of those things that the only thing I knew is taxes, really. Taxes, accounting. I had auditing experience, but I knew that I didn't want to do that. I didn't like it. Taxes, I thought, hey, this could really help a small business owner out and really do that. And so it was something that I could do. Didn't enjoy it, but could definitely do it. But I had to do it initially because I had to make money. I bootstrapped my company. I had no cash in the bank. I had no big reserves or anything like that to get started. So I bootstrapped it. So I had to do something. And so with that, I did exactly what my dad did. I worked 80 hours a week and I worked a lot. I hired my business partner right out of college without any money. And he got paid before I did for probably the first, year and a half, 2 years, maybe even longer than that. He was getting a salary. I was getting nothing. Sometimes, I was borrowing my line of credit a lot of times. So it was a struggle, not my line of credit, my credit cards, which was my line of credit. Many credit cards at that point. I'd never recommend that to anybody ever to do in starting, but that's something I had to do in order to get to where I wanted to be. And so I would consider that very boring, but I had to do it because I knew in order to get this big goal here that I wanted to achieve, that was part of it. And so with that, that's what's really sprung the fact that a couple different things. It sprung the fact that I created what we call the virtual CFO service 20 plus years ago. I created it to where it wasn't just the accounting and bookkeeping and all that kind of stuff, which a lot of people call virtual CFO today, but it was more the strategy on top of it. It was meeting with the business owner, going through the next 12 months with them, showing them, hey, here's what their cash position is going to look like. Here's what here's what their loans are going to look like. Here's when we can pay those things off. All that kind of stuff was really cool because I could really go through the strategy. Hey, how much is the price increase going to impact, going forward? And can I afford vacations to my employees or whatever that might be? I'm talking to these small business owners, and I'd say small business owners are probably 5 million to $10 million in business. So they weren't really large, but they weren't really small. And they got so much benefit out of it. It was amazing because I just assumed they already knew that and understood that. And I was like, wow, this is something I could really bring to them. So then it was like, okay, so I don't like to do the tax stuff. I don't like to do the accounting stuff, but I do like to do the advising stuff. And I thought, how can I package this so that I could give this to clients and it could be a really great benefit? Because one thing I did lack is I lacked capital. I didn't have any cash. And so I couldn't afford to be the accounts receivable for people. I couldn't afford to be that bank. And so with that, I had to figure out how can we do this differently? Because the traditional accounting firms back then, they billed by the hour. And so they billed by the hour, they invoice, and then they would, collect the money maybe 30 days out after that. And so that cash cycle was just too long for me. And so I had to figure out how can I get this quicker? And that's when I created the subscription-based billing model. And back in 2007-ish, somewhere in there, I started, just zapping people's accounts and was like, hey, here's the bundled service you're going to get. and I'm going to take that money out every month. And I did that. People loved it. They never heard of it before. It was like great. It was kind of like it was about the same time Netflix came in and did something very similar. And I thought, this is awesome. Clients are paying me in advance, and I'm getting things done. I don't need to be the bank anymore. And believe it or not, they started coming to the meetings even more, because a lot of times they get behind with their payments, and they'd be embarrassed to come to the meeting. The meeting I'm supposed to help them, get the cash and create that forecast and all that kind of stuff. They were embarrassed they didn't show up, but now they're showing up. Everything was going really great, and so it allowed me to create a virtual CFO model, something that was never done at that point, and people really didn't start really picking it up until COVID-ish, where they started bringing in a similar type of a model, which was great because I've been teaching CPA firms for a long time how to do this. They finally started working on it and doing it and scaling it and stuff. Yeah, but with that, it also allowed me to do the subscription-based billing model, where again, that was something that people never, accounting firms never imagined you could ever even do that. They're like, hey, you can't take people's money out of their accounts? Don't you have to send them an invoice with an itemized bill on it showing my hourly rate and stuff? And I go, well, I don't have hourly rate. you know here it is. And and it just really allowed me to be creative and figure out, hey, these little small obstacles here, because it's boring. I didn't like to do it, but I enjoyed doing the consulting side. And eventually the consulting side became boring for me, which is kind of imagine. I think entrepreneurs all go through this. The consulting side became boring, so it's like, okay, now I got to figure out how to get myself out of that and run my business. How can and with that, I did that. We've developed processes and all that kind of stuff in place. And my business partner back then, hired out of college, he's still my business partner today. Phenomenal hire, Adam Hale, phenomenal hire. And with that, he was the executor of all my visions and all my ideas, and it worked out really, really well. It was a yin and yang type of thing. And with that, it developed all the way through to the fact that, okay, so now I'm growing my business. And in 2000, it was 2013 or 2011, we picked up a client that was fully remote, one of the first ever remote companies. They had like 50 people all across the United States. They were a creative agency. They are a digital marketing agency. And with that, it's kind of cool because they did something that no one else had done. I was like, this is really cool. And I thought, hey, we could do this ourselves. And and so we tried. And the cool thing was, it allowed us to have another pain point. How can we expand and grow bigger? Because in Indiana, you can only hire so many people there, right? And so with that, it opened the world up to us, and we started hiring people in California, Denver, New York, all over the place, and it was amazing. It was like, wow, this is great. And so it was just the difference in the evolution of an entrepreneur. Going from doing something they really didn't like, but they're good at. I'm good at doing taxes and all that kind of stuff. Just didn't like it, and taking that and finding out what can I enjoy doing even more and more and more. And now I've actually gotten to the point where I sold the company 4 years ago, and I'm in a bigger organization trying to develop and bring our at that point a $10 million accounting firm or $10 million virtual CFO practice, to bring it to a $50 million. This year we'll do about 17. So we're definitely on our way on building it up and really getting that to scale. And so that's the new exciting thing. Because right now, it's kind of boring. It's boring when everything's going well. It's kind of weird how that works. I was talking to a coach just the other day. It's like, I am super bored. And he's like, why are you bored? You're doing, well. It's like, yeah, because there's no issues. Right now, everything's going well. Clients like us, employees like us, profit margins are high. The partners love us. Everything is going really well. It's like, well, don't create an issue. Don't do a lot of entrepreneurs to create an issue to think. I'm like, I won't, but I got to figure out, hey, how can I get to that next level? So what's that next big challenge that's going to really excite me to get to that next level? What's that new innovation that we're going to actually develop? Is it because we did the remote stuff, we did the subscription base, we did the virtual CFO. There's got to be something new. I think it has something to do with AI. And so we're really working to figure out, hey, what could that be? And then how can we actually monetize that and make it something even bigger?
Who's your ideal client?
Ideal clients, probably a business. I'd say on the low end about $5 million in revenue, on the high end about $100 million, somewhere in that ballpark. It's usually somebody that's grown to the point where they don't have a CFO, maybe can't afford one, and then they can bring us on to really kind of help them out. And if they do have a CFO, a lot of times, if they've grown fast, a lot of times the CFO is really not qualified. So we can sit alongside it as an FP&A person to kind of really help that client out too. And so, with that, anywhere between that ballpark are great clients. We initially focused on marketing agencies. That was our number one client. And when we did that, when we created a vertical, the marketing vertical was great. We started really becoming the niche expert in that, the thought leader in that one. And since then, we thought, hey, how can we create that same niche into the legal industry? And so we started doing it with law firms and then transportation companies and then construction companies and real estate. So we started really doing, rinsing and repeating that same similar model that we created, versus a niche thought leadership model into these different industries. So, we're agnostic when it comes to businesses in general because they all go through the same, it's all the same theory, all the same ideas. The vernacular is a lot different. Everybody thinks their business is a little different, and it is a little different, but in reality, a lot of the businesses are very similar. And that's where our CFOs with all this vast knowledge can really help. And so I'd say on the low end, $5 million, and the high end, $100 million is, is a typical client, and sometimes even more, depends on the situation.
So you mentioned 17 million today that you're bringing in, things are going well, but then you also
Yep.
mentioned there was a time that you were putting things on a credit card, right? You're putting your living
Yep.
expenses on
Yep.
a credit card. So take us
Mhm.
back because there had to have been some point where you thought that it wasn't going to work out. What kept you going? What kept
You
you?
know,
Is it just the
I
grit inside you?
Yeah, it's kind of weird. I never thought it wasn't going to work out.
Okay.
I never it's kind of and that takes me all the way back in high school, and I wrestled in high school. It's like I could wrestle a state champ and think, hey, I'm going to beat that person. Here's how I'm going to do it in my head. I get out and I get killed, and then I'm like, okay, well, I'll beat him the next time. It was always I always had that. You might call it grit. You might call it not naive, being naive. I have no idea what you call it, but it was one of those things that I just always thought that I could accomplish things, and I just had to figure out how to get that done. Now, when we were doing when we were on credit cards the whole time, I'm like, okay, I developed my plan. Here's how we're going to get out of it. And I told my wife, it was kind of it became a running joke actually. I told my wife, hey, next year's going to be the year. Here's what I'm going to do. Here's how it's going to happen. And then something I would not even remotely expect happen, and I would be back to where I was at again. And it's like, oh, okay, well then, honey, here's April. Here's April's my wife. Here's what's going to happen here, and it just can continue to rinse and repeat. Where eventually. I finally did it. I finally figured out, all the different things. I finally got through all those hurdles. So yeah, it had to be the grit or just basically the belief that, hey, I'm not going to fail. I can't fail. I got a family. I've got all these different things I've got to figure out how to make sure I succeed. And going back to work, a 9 to 5 job was not an option for me. It was like I can't do that. And with that, I think that really drove me, and it still drives me today. It's amazing. You put guardrails on me, and it's like it just makes it. It's like, oh, the confinement. It's like I've got to be able to have that risk reward, and that's just really how it was. And the funny thing was is that here I'm talking finance, I'm talking accounting. The one thing that held me back was pricing. I couldn't price right. I always thought I could do it faster and quicker than what I actually could do it. And then when I finally did do it, then I'd bring people in and expect them to be able to do it the same speed and quickness and accuracy that I was doing it. Colossal mistake. And with that, once I figured pricing out and pricing by demand and everything, that's when everything just started changing. The world changed pretty quickly. It went from, I would say, probably from 2002 to 2008. I wasn't doing anything. I was going really, really flat. And then once I figured out pricing and the subscription-based billing model really helped with that, it just started skyrocketing, where I saw high returns. We were hitting 20, 25%, 30% a year. We were on that Fortune, the thousand, whatever that is, Inc. 1000, 7, 8 years in a row. All with the growth that we had there, and the profit margins were trailing it really well. And that was key. So pricing was the biggest thing that really kind of helped us get over that. But yeah, it's amazing. I just don't have that failure. If failure is not an option for me, and I think a lot of business owners, I think a lot of entrepreneurs are, that way. At least I would hope they are, because, if not, man, I think they're holding themselves back, because fear might be getting into it.
Sure. So two questions. So
Mhm.
why do you think it took you so long to figure out pricing? And what do you think most businesses are getting pricing wrong? And if so, what's something that they need to look at as it pertains to their pricing models?
Yeah, so the biggest thing was is that I mentioned, and he's probably going to listen to this. He's going to probably hit me over the head when he hears this and deny it completely. But I was very optimistic. I thought, hey, here's what our service can provide. Here's what our service is worth. And my business partner would say, no one is going to buy it for that. And it's like, and then it was like, well, yeah, they will. Yeah, they will. No, they won't. And so we priced it, and I'm just going to throw numbers out there. Let's say we priced our service at $10,000 a year. It's like, no one's going to buy that. And it's like, well, we were picking up 80% of our sales. We were like, hey, we're great salespeople. We're winning all these deals. And little did we realize that is because we're so lowly priced. And so we started increasing the supply and demand type, increasing the price a little higher. And then no one's going to buy it. No one's going to buy it. It's like, yeah, they will. And boom, they bought it $20,000. And so our average client pays about $80,000 a year for us, and we still close about 50% of our deals. So we could potentially get it down to close to that 30% mark, which is I think the real goal, and increase our price. We could do that. We've decided not to and flatten out the 50%, but it was really that. It was the fact that, our own beliefs, prevented us from achieving what we thought we could do. We just didn't think we were worth it. And and the reason being is nobody had that service before. We weren't, no one, we didn't have a roadmap. It was like this was a brand new thing. Had we come out of the gate and said, hey, here's what we're valued at. It's, this service is 80 or 90 or 60 or whatever the dollar amount was, we'd have been successful from the very beginning. But the problem with that is we probably wouldn't have done all the things that we did. We probably wouldn't have created the subscription-based billing model. We probably wouldn't have done, a lot of the things that we did today because we had those issues there. So there's no regrets at all. It just took a long time to get to where we realized, hey, this is what we're worth. We're gonna charge you $150,000. Here's what it is, and it's like magically the client's like, okay, let's do it. And it's like, we just never thought we could do that before, and so that was the limiting belief. What I would say with clients to answer your second question is what are people pricing wrong today? Well, the fact that, hey, when you create a forecast, you need to, everybody should have a forecast. And I don't mean a budget where you start at the beginning of the year and you look at it and you just compare yourself to how well you guessed. I'm not talking about that. A lot of people do that, and that's kind of there's not a huge lot of benefits there. What a forecast is, it's very dynamic and it's really revenue controlled. So you're looking at, hey, here's what we have today. Here's what actually happened in January when you create that budget. And now how does that impact things going forward? How does that affect everything, going forward? We thought we were going to have, $100,000 in the bank, let's say in December. Now we're down to 60 because we had a really bad January. Do we need to make some adjustments in our forecast so that we get back to that 100? What does that need to do? Do we need to increase our price? Do we need to increase, the number of pickups? Is there a sales issue? What are issues today that can impact there? And so that's important to have. But to kind of answer that question even further, you really need to know what that end goal is. What do I as an entrepreneur need to make when I exit my company? What's the value of my company need to be? What do I have to have in order to pay, to get where I want to be in my lifestyle? Maybe I want to make $1 million a year or whatever that might be. What does that have to be? And then kind of reverse engineer it back into your forecast. It's amazing when you do that, the decisions that you make, are completely different, because now you've got that goal, your target. You're not just going, flat. You know exactly where you want to be, and you know how to course correct all the way through. And it's not a game of I got to have this by the end of the year. I don't play that game at all. There's no such thing to me as an end of the year. It's like, hey, is it going to take me 5 years, 3 years, 2.5 years, 18 months? What is that going to be? The end of the year is just to cover taxes. Just keep that in mind. That's the only reason we have an end of the year. It's for taxes. That's a big part of the equation there, but that's not the end goal. So we're always looking 12 months out, 18 months out, 20 months out, 3 years, whatever that end goal is. You've got to figure out what that is and then build everything into it. And guess what? Price is a big part of that. Hey, what if I increase price by a little bit or reduce costs by a little bit? It can be either way. It comes to the same thing. How does that impact me getting quicker to that goal? And when you do that, when you exercise that, when you look at it on a regular, weekly, monthly basis, not when you need it, but when you do that, it's magic how things just happen. It truly is.
Yeah, I really appreciate you mentioning that. And I really appreciate this conversation today. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for
Oh,
all
you
the
bet, Matt.
value that you shared. There's a few things I'm going to have as a takeaway from our conversation. So the very first thing we talked about that I appreciate is what you said regarding cash, right? Building enough cash. You fill this in on your perspective on debt and leveraging debt. You said use cash as a line of credit. Tremendous wisdom in that. The second thing that you said, and I really need to change some of my habits based on this. As you said, use AI against AI. Especially with how prevalent AI is now, do we have multiple AI systems as those checks and balances? I think everyone can immediately implement that, take that
Mhm.
as a takeaway. So I appreciate you sharing that. And then the third and final piece is you said everyone should have a forecast. Here's where we are today. Here's how that affects us going forward. And then you broke down what it would mean to have a legitimate forecast. And I really appreciate that. If
Mhm.
someone wants to reach out to you, your team for your services, maybe they want to reach out to figure out the best way to implement a forecast for them specifically, where's the best place they can go to get that information?
Yeah, they can always reach out to me directly through my email address, jgrundon@anderscpa.com, or feel free to reach out. I'm all over the internet, so if you Google me at all, you're going to find a lot of videos out there that really kind of walk through a lot of that, a lot of do-it-yourself stuff. And if you really wanted to go even further with that, then feel free to give me a buzz or reach out an email. Email is probably the easiest way to getting a hold of me.
Okay, perfect. I'll include that in the show notes. People would just click and go from there.
Yep.
Thanks again, Jody. Really appreciate your time today.
Well, it's been fun, Matt.
Thank you for listening to the Stories with Traction podcast. If you found this discussion helpful, please leave a review since positive reviews help others find these conversations. New episodes drop regularly, so stay tuned. And remember, if you want to persuade with power and inspire those around you to take action, you must share more stories.